Welcome to the Mix Minus podcast. This is Matthew McQueenie, and joining me after quite a sabbatical is Tim Castano. I almost forgot your last name. How are you, Tim?
I'm well, thank you, Matt. How are you?
Good. I guess in life we're good, but in sports we're good and bad, and I think we both root for the Giants, and we both thought that they would have quite an uphill struggle this year, regardless of how the team played, because the schedule was so tough, and especially the early part of the schedule, and they almost laid an offer. They're at this point 1-7, halfway through the season with a bye upon them, and when you reach the bottom of the barrel, you often don't see the ways out, but sometimes that's the best place to start to recoup some sense of confidence and figuring out where you're going to go from here. What have been your what have been your overall thoughts on where the New York Giants have gone along the way? It's sort of been like it's been weird because you're sort of in each game. Their offense doesn't play well ever, almost, except in a game they lose in Carolina. And the defense has been frisky. They just don't have enough players to get to the quarterback. So it's not been like you're out of the game, but you always feel hopeless. Where have you felt, Tim?
Well, what I've thought of is as season ticket holders back in the 80s, at the end of each season, they would send you a video compilation of the prior season. And, they were performing quite well in the late 80s. But it has crossed my mind that if they continued with that practice in today's day and age, what the last two VHS videos of the Giants seasons would look like. And they almost would read fairly similarly from last year's season to this season.
Yeah.
And I think there's almost like a larger existential question that Giants fans have had to confront over the last several weeks, which is we may not just be a good franchise anymore, where we've always leaned on the fact that historically we've been a great franchise, especially over the last 10 years or so. And now we are looking at a situation where we just seem to be making the wrong decisions over and over again. And some people have traced it back to Josh Brown and how that was handled. And then how they've managed some of the other players and signings and drafts. And it does not add up to anything that is all that promising. And I think a lot of us hoped that 2 seasons ago, going to the playoffs, that last season was the aberration, and that this season we could correct some of the flaws that had led to last season's disaster. But that has not been the case. We just have to accept the fact that this is really a tear-down job right now, which the team seems to be acknowledging with some of the trades that they made and some of the trades that they probably considered as well. So I think I had them at 7 wins, which I thought was maybe a little generous and optimistic. Obviously, they're not going to get there. You're right about the defense. The defense has been. It's not as if they're getting completely torched every single game. They're not. They just can't get the ball in the end zone. They sputter on offense. They don't seem to be calling the right plays, executing the plays that they are calling. Take your pick, but it's not been a great stretch to be a Giants fan.
Well, and I think we were prepared for this reckoning, and the Giants were to a degree. But in their heart of hearts, they thought it was going to be in 2 years, and at worst, it would be in 1 year, and that you would have a year like 2 years ago this year. And I think it's a complete shock that the reckoning, let's be honest, was almost here in week 4 of the first year. And I think the worry for me is, how could they be so wrong? How could they feel that this was a team that was there? And then it makes you start to wonder, does kind of the rot of what we see on the field at this point go all the way up to the owner's box almost? And do you trust anybody that's in place making decisions? Do you trust them to do the right thing or have their finger on the pulse of where this league is? And look, things can turn around real quickly, as we saw 2 years ago, and the Giants went from having a young decision maker in Jerry Reese, or a younger, to an older in Dave Gettleman, who unfortunately had some health issues as well, which I'm sure there's no way that couldn't have played into some inability to make decisions at certain points. But they put it in the hands of an older coach as well. And I'm starting to wonder, is it even a bigger existential than we're thinking? Much like you said, that they're a bad organization at this point. I mean, they're almost a past couple of years Cleveland Browns level now. What do you think about that? And that's the hardest part to kind of undo.
Well, let's ask that question. Would you rather have the Giants roster or the Browns roster right now?
I'd rather have the Browns because they already have Odell Beckham and Landry. They have his best friend. They have the quarterback, and
they got a very good defense.
They got a really good defense, and it's crazy what happened with their staff there. But the one thing I have to say about that decision, that was at least John Dorsey making that decision in the best interest of the quarterback. And I actually saw, I think it was Kevin Clark from The Ringer had a hilarious tweet. He said, "Isn't it fitting that Hugh Jackson's final kind of competition as head coach of the Browns ended in a tie?" But yeah, I think you have to take the Browns. And look, these things change so fast. The NFL's crazy. Remember how kind of mediocre the Saints looked the last couple of years before their resurgence of late. You get a bunch of draft picks, you draft the right people, and things change in a hurry. That's the beauty of the NFL. But you're also just in a spot where you're wondering, the Giants made decisions in the ownership group, made decisions in who they brought on board to be win now. And now it's sort of this position where you have to flip this, and it's not win now anymore, but you have a 67, 66-year-old GM. You have a late 50s coach. You obviously have a late 30s quarterback who will not be here, and it's been hard to watch that, especially this year. But if it's going to be obvious he's done, I'd rather it be blatantly obvious like this year. And then there's going to be a contingent of us, I know you're thinking it in the back of your head, if he had a line, would he be okay? But I think we've reached the point where so many great quarterbacks don't actually have great lines and they're able to overcome it, that has to be kind of part of what you get with a quarterback, and why legs are so important, and maneuverability and escapability, not just getting away from one tackle, but actually moving down the field with your legs. But do they have the right brain trust in place now for the tear down and the rebuild with young players and drafted players?
I don't know. There are some moves that were made over the last 10 months that do call into question some of the decision making. So Nate Solder, I think most people in the league, you had heard them rumble and say that Nate Solder was not worth the contract that they paid him and that they reached to get him. So far in the field, that seems to be the case. So if that was the marquee signing of the offseason, that does raise some issues. I think the fact that Saquon Barkley has shown so much promise and has played very, very well so far, that does dull some of the criticism about should they have taken Darnold or Rosen or Allen. We'll be having that conversation for years and years, provided that Darnold continues to play well and depending upon how Rosen and Allen mature. But it's funny because people, the position that they're probably going to find themselves in now is very similar to the position they found themselves in last year, except now they have Saquon Barkley. So you could say, well, okay, you can have your cake and eat it too in terms of getting a terrific running back as well as a top-rated quarterback, hopefully, if they're drafting at the very top of the draft. But to your point, do you want this brain trust making those choices? And I don't know. I mean, the Solder pick is the one that bothers me the most. The other draft picks, I mean, Hernandez, some of the other, Hill, if they haven't worked out just yet, I think that they will. But I wish they'd gone I wish they'd been a little bit more aggressive with the trade deadline, which, by the way, is starting to look more and more like the NBA trade deadline as opposed to the NFL trade deadline. Yeah. I mean, the NFL trade deadline used to just come and go without even a blip, but now it's turned a little bit into the NBA with how frenetic the activity was yesterday. But I wish they'd been a little bit more aggressive in unloading, maybe Jenkins unloading, even Vernon, and I like Vernon, but I think there were some teams that were interested in him, and just, go that route. And you pointed out how quickly things can change. The one that I always think of is the Indianapolis Colts, who went from 3-13 in Peyton Manning's rookie season to 13-3 the next season. And they made some good choices in the draft, most notably Edgerrin James, but that does go to show you how quickly it can happen. I'm just concerned, I think as most Giants fans are, about the quarterback situation because it does not take a long memory to go back and recall the days of Danny Cannell, Kent Graham, Dave Brown, into Kerry Collins, who was successful but wasn't the long-term answer. And are we headed for that type of wilderness right now, in which case we really are going to miss Eli Manning more than we even would otherwise?
Yeah, and on top of it, I keep hearing this idea, well, they're going to bottom out this year anyway and be at the top of the draft for a quarterback. We knew, in hindsight, going in, last year really appeared to be the year of the quarterback. This year appears to be much more the year of kind of infrastructure, the meat of football players, defensive players, which the Giants have had in a lot of their runs. It's been based on defensive players, but you really do have to have a quarterback who leads the team in the modern NFL. And it's funny, you brought up the Colts in that Peyton Manning time. How about when Peyton Manning went out with the neck injury?
They had nobody. They brought in Kerry Collins.
Yeah, they brought in and the painters of the world, these folks, and they were awful. And then they were able to draft Andrew Luck. They moved on from Peyton Manning, who still went on to have an unbelievable 4 or 5 years in Denver. But they drafted Andrew Luck, and they immediately went 11-5 and 11-5. So a lot of times the quarterback really is the difference between a putrid team and what appears to be an elite team at times and an upper playoff team. And so I just worry that they really made the wrong decision. And I loved Barkley, but I needed them to be sure in their mind that Eli was the guy. And they brought in Pat Shurmur because Pat Shurmur had turned Case Keenum into a 13-win quarterback. He'd done all this magic in Minnesota, and he's supposed to be the whisperer and the guru. And if he's going to tell me Eli's going to be okay, and I know sometimes you take a job and you're kind of getting the feeling from those interviewing you that they want a certain outcome, so you talk to that outcome to get the job, and then you convince yourself it's okay. But it's not our job as fans to say it's okay. We're nostalgically able to say, oh, I want to go forward with Eli. If they say that, I'm really excited about that. We can get one more run with them. But it's their job. And if their decision was wrong by like week 3 or 4, then they made the wrong decision, and they kind of relinquished a great decision in what was a quarterback draft. I would almost rather have any of those quarterbacks. And look, I got to do a lot more looking at Justin Herbert, but it just doesn't have the same amount of quarterbacks in the cupboard this year who are no doubters. And when you're drafting at the top of the draft, that's where you have to have the no doubter quarterback for real. And they had the opportunity with Darnold, and we've said it, since the minute he was drafted, and we had our podcast where we prognosticated on the year, maybe poorly, although we're only halfway there. But Darnold is going to be in this city for 10 to 15 years potentially, having great success. He's shown the ability to be a quarterback at a very young age in the NFL. He's had his lumps, but he's looked good when he's kept on his feet, when he has the ability to take the team down the field at key moments. And we could have had that, and wherever Barkley was, we would have been into it, but we wouldn't have been like, oh my God, we could have had him. And my other final point on that, as great as Barkley been, and his kind of electric flourishes have been unbelievable, but he doesn't really move the chains from set of downs to set of downs. He's sort of and look, this could be the line, obviously, but he gets knocked back a lot of times. And then there's the one where he goes for 70 and he breaks everybody's ankles and breaks all tackles. But that's what worries me is he going to be that running back anyway? The one who you can get a quarterback who can learn his way. And then Barkley can kind of carry the team from the running position. In my opinion, he should be able to carry the team from the running position with the old quarterback too. So I do have a worry there, but we can always say that's the line. We could say it's coaching. There's so many kind of variables that play into that. But man, not getting Darnold at that spot for many ways is going to be like a 30 for 30 if those still exist in however many years this decision comes to play out.
Yes, hopefully. I think I'm on record with our last podcast, in which I said I think they should have taken Darnold. So I'm not alone in that, so I can't take credit. I'm not Moses coming down the mountains with the tablets with that one. But I agree. It's they could have had their Peyton Manning to Andrew Luck transition, just handed to them with Eli Manning to Sam Darnold, but they didn't do it. They didn't do it because they had made their evaluation about how they thought the season would unfold. The season certainly has not unfolded that way, so now it's, let's tear it up and figure out what we're going to do next. And I think that's one of the aspects when I said the existential crisis that Giants fans are going through a little bit is, yes, about the trust that we can place in the decision makers currently at the helm, but also the fact that we have so many needs and more needs than we expected. So the line up and down, we need to fix. Quarterback needs to be fixed, which says nothing about some of the moves that need to be made in the secondary if they strip it down and don't sign Collins, and obviously gotten rid of Eli Apple already. So it's going to be it seems like it's going to be a long process.
The thing I just don't want to see is they move on from Eli. I mean, I understand that. I'm not saying that part, but this contingency plan, they move on from Eli and they say, well, Pat Shurmur did have a lot of success with Sam Bradford and Case Keenum.
Or Teddy Bridgewater.
You know what, though? He's still 25.
He's better. Yeah,
he's still 25. But my worry is the Keenums or the Bradfords. I don't want those guys to put on a New York Giants uniform as the starting quarterback.
Well, there was even a whisper about they might be in the Derek Carr market.
That one I'm okay with, to be honest.
Really?
Derek Carr
is still a very high completion percentage this season.
Yeah, and he did take a team. They went 10-6. I think he got hurt that year, but he was on the path to being an MVP candidate. His brother played here as Eli's backup. That's something. But that one I'm okay with because I think he's young enough that, again, these are the folks making the decisions. So they made the same decision in last year's draft, and that didn't play out. But if they think this guy has the fundamentals to be really good, it looks like it is a chop shop special in Oakland. So he probably is gettable. So if you don't think there's a quarterback in this draft, or you don't want to draft him at the top of the draft board, and you want to get one in the second round or late first or third, whatever the case may be, I would, if he's available and you can get him, hey, I might even trade Odell Beckham.
I think you bring in a Carr because you don't want to waste Odell Beckham's prime.
No, I know, but I wonder if there's an addition by subtraction there because even this year has gone a little crazy with him, don't you think?
I do. I always try to give him the benefit of the doubt, and he certainly, other than his incident in France, the off season seemed to be going well, and early part of the season he was saying and doing all the right things. I'm not with, say, the Giants fans who call up the fan every day and just say that he needs to be shipped out and they need to get rid of him, and they don't have the best, most high-minded critiques of Odell Beckham Jr. But you do get to a point with certain players where both sides just need a change of scenery, or one change of personnel, the other change of scenery, and we probably have reached that point with Odell Beckham Jr., where it may be in his best interest to play elsewhere, and maybe in the Giants' best interest to recoup whatever they can from him and just start all over, move on.
Yeah, well, I don't think he's going to change wherever he goes. This is just who he is. He's very eccentric, and he's very flamboyant, and he's unbelievably skilled. But at his position, he's not going to get the ball more than he gets the ball, and that's the difficulty and the conundrum of him. It's sort of like what you had with T.O. If you're not throwing him the ball constantly, it goes badly. And you can't get it to him constantly. It's really difficult. A funny team might be like the Saints, right? Send him home. If he's playing with Drew Brees would be very good about getting him the ball, but Drew Brees might not be there for a long time. I'm not looking to get rid of him, but I just am. There's just a lot of smoke coming out of his quarters over there. It's too much.
We just could be looking in terms of the alignment of time frames and where the Giants are now, 1-7, and looking at next season already, they're operating with a different time frame than they were at the start of this season. So the time frame that they had in place previously, Odell Beckham fit within that because you had a veteran quarterback, other veteran players, young running back, good young skill position players who were competing for a playoff position. That has changed. And the time frame now may no longer align with Odell Beckham's career, meaning do you need a receiver with his skill set paid what he has paid when you are rebuilding the rest of the team around him? And the answer may be no.
So your season ticket holder, your family or season ticket holders, have they just moved on from this team? And how quickly did they move on? Or are they still kind of struggling and caring about the team?
We still care and we still watch. It is, it's not the same, obviously. Like as with any sport, when you're winning, the interest level's higher. We don't really have that many conversations about the Giants. So that tells you something. And most people, any conversations you have with them are about decisions they should have made differently and the decisions they should be making in the future. Not a lot of them are focused on the present.
Yeah. We're going to talk NBA. Let's, we're halfway in the NFL season. What have been some of have you been able to watch a lot of the games, or has the Giants kind of futility kept you from watching a lot of the NFL?
No, I've kept up with it as much as I can.
So if we look, it's funny because there's a lot of storylines in the matchups. Right off the bat Thursday, I would never bet on this game. And by the way, I did go 8-3 in my picks against the spreads last week, so I'm getting a little better, I think. But you got the kind of Bay Area for the moment showdown in the Raiders and 49ers, two teams who I believe thought they were going to be the opposite records at 6-1 and 7-1, or something closer than really the hopelessness that they are in. And I think you almost wonder with the Raiders if this was actually a plan to tear this all down and
rebuild it
the money
for Las Vegas.
Right, and that the money that was given to Gruden had to be that high because he was getting that from his announcing deal and he needed a premium on that. And it was almost hush money to go out there and be the PR guy to cover up for this monstrosity of what was once a pretty decent football team with a high-level quarterback and a high-level pass rusher who's been really good with Chicago. But, yeah, I think these two teams have been a bit of a shock from where we are. And, look, the Jimmy Garoppolo injury, you can't really – there's nothing you could do about that. But it's funny because Beathard can be, like, weirdly competitive, and he sort of has the beard, so he's got a little bit of the Ryan Fitzpatrick thing going on. Yeah. But, man – that is about as bad as a Thursday night game can be.
It really is. You almost, I guess you can't flex Thursday night games, otherwise they might have. And, then you have the 49ers on Monday night, the following week with the Giants. So those are two really bad primetime matchups within a span of about 10 days. So not good. I wouldn't say there's been any huge, I'm probably a little surprised that the Saints have played as well as they have. Surprised also that Los Angeles is still undefeated. I thought they might be good, but I didn't realize that they would be undefeated at this point.
Yeah.
And have had the chance to watch them play, and they seem legitimate. I mean, I don't know if I pick them to win the Super Bowl right now, but I don't know if I would pick any team to win the Super Bowl right now. Kansas City, I've watched them play, and that's fun.
They're must-watch. They're actually must-watch now. I mean, it's compelling to have the superstar quarterback with kind of the preternatural skill. Just, you don't know what's going to happen next. You just want to watch. And you realize when we go back to quarterbacks, you just realize how important they are. And I mean, you take it to the next level. The guy they discarded was pretty good too, and he's doing a really good job with Washington. I'm finding myself almost being like, almost feeling good for Washington because they sort of have the cast-off quarterback who is quietly doing a lot with that team to be, what are they? Aren't they 5-2? Yeah, they're 5-2. And you look at the fact that the quarterback who we had to hear so much about, and I'm not speaking badly of him, Kirk Cousins, goes up to Minnesota and is not as good with a team that should be much better.
Yeah, and if you look at the way Washington is built, they have a really good offensive line and a very good defensive line. So you can put in an Alex Smith, and I've always been an Alex Smith fan, and I want to see him succeed. But going back to the Giants a little bit, looking at what one of their division competitors has done to get to the top of the standings, what are the two things that they have in common? I mean, or what are the two pieces they have in place? They have a very strong offensive line and a very strong defensive line.
We said that at the beginning of the year, that what was the one thing that was most different when you look at the Pro Football Focus grades of position units in that NFC East? It was that the Redskins, the Eagles, and the Cowboys, who are, it's funny when you get to these parts of the season and you have a certain kind of perception of how a team's done, and then you're like, whoa, they're close to 500, which is shocking. But you look at those three teams, and they had like top 5 offensive lines, and the Giants were like 27th. That plays out because those are the guys who every play means something. The Odell Beckhams, the Sterling Shepards, the Evan Ingrams, the Saquon Barkleys, they mean something 1 out of every 4 plays, or for wide receivers, sometimes 1 out of every 5 or 6. Those lines matter every single play, and that's why you have to build inside out. You get a great quarterback, and then you make sure he's protected, and you're probably going to win 10 games. I mean, it really does kind of come down to that. And I would be shocked if Washington does end up at 10, and I would feel really good for Alex Smith, and as crazy as that is to say as a Giants fan, but I feel really good that he got them to 10-6, and who knows where that tie might hurt Kirk Cousins from getting to that number up there. But there was, I think it was maybe last week, I forget who the Redskins were playing, but they had some graphic where they were like, over the last 18 games, they're 9-9. Over the last 30 games, they're 15-15. Over the last 50 games, they're 25-25. Like, they were always regressing or progressing to always be around 500. And now, at least for a moment, they might have broken out of that. Now the season's long, and we could be just as shocked that when the season's over, they're 7-9 when they were 5-2. So you never know. The Jets were even 3-2 last year, but those are nice to see. But you look at the Steelers and the Ravens came out where they looked like they right now should be 6-2 or 5-2, and they're 4-4. While the Steelers, who you feel like there's so much kind of smoke around that team and so many bad things, and they're 4-2-1. I mean, it's just funny the way it all works. And really, as Bill Parcells always said, I don't want to talk about anything except the record. That is what you are. The record says what you are.
Yeah, and we could be looking at something in Green Bay right now. I'm interested to see which direction in which that moves. Will this season sort of? We sort of had hints of it last season because of the Rodgers injury, and but then they managed to rally and pull it together. And there were some whispers about Mike McCarthy possibly being on the way out, the locker room having tired of him. But now, here we are. They've played 7 games, and those calls are growing a little bit louder. So I'm interested to see what direction that team goes in. Like, are they the team that sort of rallies and pulls it together and makes a playoff run, or is this a reset for them?
Well, you just want to see dominance from a team that has that level of quarterback, who appears to be so much better than other quarterbacks, except maybe 1 or 2. You don't expect them to just always be in the mud and always be down or always seem to be making mistakes. And there was a big ESPN feature today about imagining an alternate reality where Aaron Rodgers played for Bill Belichick his whole career, and just what the difference would mean having the great mind at quarterback with the amazingly great mind at head coach, as opposed to Mike McCarthy, who sort of just did it by dint of effort and just by kind of being the old Midwestern football guy, touching his belly, like all that crazy stuff. But, is his genius able to be kind of best showcased where he is and with who he plays for? And in the NFL, you just don't move around like a LeBron James might. Like, he might be as good in his sport as LeBron James is in his, but there the player determines what happens. The player determines the coaches. He has more ability to be kind of footloose and move from team to team. Football just doesn't really have that, and football players appear to be more almost comfortable with staying where they are often because you're only playing once a week, so you just get a nice home and you go to the practice facility. It's always weird to me, too, with football that all these guys, these quarterbacks, get up at like 5 a.m. to go to the practice facility at 6. Like, it's such an unsports thing to do. It's almost like being a CEO of a business, and really they can do that because their sport, the time they have to be ready to go is 1 in the afternoon, which in contrast to an NBA player or other sports where they got to be going strong at 7, that's why they get into their facilities at different times. But football's funny that way, that everybody gets into the facility at 6. Everyone must be so tired. But yeah, I do wonder about that with Aaron Rodgers. Like, you just saw that first game where he came all the way back from being down. It was 20-0, right, to the Bears, and just the way he did it, and he was carted off the field. It looked like his season was over. And you expect when you have a win like that you're going to look up at week 8 or week 9 where we are, and that the Packers would be like 7-1 or 6-2. Like, that you come back to life from a game like that you need to be better than 3-1. I mean, it's kind of disheartening a little bit, I think, for a team. I've also been very surprised. The Seahawks, who were sort of left for dead, are 4-3. And how about the Texans, who were really left for dead when the Giants beat them? What were they, 0-3 at that point? And I think they had to go to overtime in the 4th game, and they've now won 5 straight, and they look like they've picked themselves back up off the mat. I mean, we talk about what you can do season to season with a team. How about what they did with a little momentum in a season? You had the coach fired. You had questions of if the quarterback was just a one-year wonder. You had questions about, is the defense past its expiration? And look, Bill Parcells, look at the record, 5-3.
Yeah, they've done well, and they just made a big trade yesterday, so that should help them in the receiving core. And I think Deshaun Watson, I mean, I watched him play. It was last Thursday night's game, right? And he looked really, really good. Really, really good. And I mean, as a Giants fan, of course, I probably look a little bit more intently at the quarterback position, and watching him, the way he's able to move and move within the pocket and deliver the ball is it's impressive. And I'm happy for the Texans. I mean, Bill O'Brien, he seems like he's a little bit cantankerous, never happy where he is, and you start to wonder if maybe this was finally the season where a change was made, either mutually or on the part of the ownership. But it seems to have righted itself, and they're a team that looks like, it's a very winnable AFC South for them. Tennessee has stumbled. The Jaguars have stumbled. I don't think Indianapolis is really going to be competitive. So I think Houston has at least the inside track on getting the AFC South.
It would be interesting if Indianapolis was, though, because 42-28 last week in Oakland. What are they, 2-5 now?
3-5.
Oh, they're 3-5 now. Okay, so they could be. You never know. They could be in the direction where Andrew Luck has his feet under him after being back half a season now, and he is just such a joy to watch. And it's when he was gone to now seeing him back in the pocket. He's just so good at being a quarterback. Like, it's so joyous to watch him play, and to watch him at times carry what I'm guessing is another substandard roster, because they just don't move without the prime mover that is Luck.
That is true. Yeah, no, it is good to see him back, and it's good to see Frank Reich get his chance as a head coach, especially after what happened last season with the Colts and their head coaching almost move. So, but yeah, I actually expected a little bit more out of the Titans. I thought they would be, I mean, they're 3-4, so it's not a disaster. They could very easily be 4-3, but I thought they might be sitting at 5-2 right now. Not 6-1, but probably 5-2. So a swing of 2 games. So that does surprise me a little bit. And the other team that seems to be, I mean, we're jumping around divisions, but I mean, Tampa Bay, what's going on in Tampa Bay? It's just, it's almost like the ghost of Lovie Smith is haunting that franchise after what they did to him. And, they got rid of him because of the offensive coordinator's relationship with Jameis Winston. And here it is, Jameis Winston might have played or might have started his last game for the Bucs. And so then what's the point of having got rid of Lovie Smith? But that's the one. What I thought would happen in Houston appears like it's going to be happening in Tampa Bay.
Dysfunction breeds dysfunction breeds dysfunction. You look at Tampa Bay, you look at the Cleveland Browns, you look at the Giants. I mean, to another degree, you look at the Oakland Raiders, but I think there's a weird, perverse plan there. But kind of when you scapegoat people, when you say this is going to be the person, this is the Messiah that's going to fix it, it never does. It's got to be an organization-wide process starting with the owner, and there needs to be stability. I mean, a lot of people talk about Pittsburgh and that they should be getting rid of this guy. Is it time for Tomlin? Is it time for this? but they don't move off of coaches and they stick to the plan. And even in a season where if you didn't look at the record, you probably perceptually feel like the Steelers have had an off season, and they're sitting there at what, 4? I think I said 4-2-1. Function breeds function and dysfunction breeds dysfunction, and it always goes badly. I mean, in some ways it's dysfunctional and bad for the team that not only Jameis Winston is not good, he seems to have regressed. He seems to almost not even be out there doing anything as a quarterback. But the fact that Ryan Fitzpatrick is so good when you don't want him to be good makes things even worse because they can't even bottom out. And he comes in and he's like the perfect. I kind of likened Ryan Fitzpatrick to one of these like baseball closers where they have the big beard, they have the eccentricities, they come in running out of the outfield. Obviously, to those of us who love Major League, it's the Ricky Vaughn thing, wild thing. And they come out and they'll get 40 saves, and then they have a great run and they get to the playoffs with their team, and then the next year they blow 10 saves, and so the team's like, ooh, we got to move off this guy. He goes to another team, he gets 40 saves, 50 saves, he's going crazy with that new team, then he falls off again and blows 12 saves and he's moving on, but he's always got the beard, he's always got the faith in himself, and he's always got the paycheck because of those every other years where he has a great season. But that really is Ryan Fitzpatrick. He is the above average closer who has dominance in him, but also has abject failure at other times, and it can spiral in whichever direction it's headed based on the momentum. It's its own momentum. But it's just a bad situation because they have so many skill players. In many ways, they're like the Giants with their skill players. They have so many skill players. They apparently have a good defense, although it lets up 1 million points. Mike Smith gets fired, and they let up 1 million more points. Mike Smith is like the most fired coach right now, this side of Todd Haley. But it's weird, and it's funny. I mean, the final thing I'd want to say before going to the NBA, it's hilarious with the Browns. We watched it on Hard Knocks, and you could see it in plain sight. And I really do believe, and I said this to you in our earlier podcast, that these shows, these Hard Knocks, these All or Nothing on Amazon can either torpedo a career, a coaching career, or it can inflate a career that maybe should be torpedoed. So I made the distinction between the two of saying Hugh Jackson, and I wasn't the only one, everyone said this, Hugh Jackson was a joke when you watched him in Hard Knocks. Who knows if they were editing it that way, although I can't imagine they're trying to make him look like a joke. Because it's an NFL property type of deal. But he didn't look good. And then I watched the other Hard Knocks and All or Nothing, where I saw Jason Garrett, who people want this guy out, get him out of here, he's not good, he claps too much. That guy looked like a CEO running the Cowboys. Everyone stayed quiet. Everyone looked like they were respecting him. He ran meetings well. He was the ultimate kind of business manager. And that guy is in some ways unimpeachable. He keeps his job somehow, because I think like the opposite of dysfunction, organization means a lot. And when you could see that on TV, they're not embarrassing the organization. When you saw Hugh Jackson on TV, it somewhat embarrassed the organization. You saw Todd Haley in there speaking against him, saying he'd do things this way. I mean, it was bad. It was embarrassing. And so those shows can kind of torpedo or inflate careers. But it's crazy that they bring in Baker Mayfield. They brought in a new GM who happened to keep these people, and I'm sure that he hired Todd Haley to be the coach in waiting. And because Todd couldn't even play nice, he had to go too. And now Greg Williams, who's like the worst of all of them. I've seen this guy on Hard Knocks for like 7 years straight with different teams. He looks like I don't want to speak terribly of him. I'm just saying in general, he almost looks like the coked out sales guy from the software company. Screaming, cursing, he's got no control, and now he's running the team with the quarterback, and you're just wondering, because what you see from Baker Mayfield is mighty impressive, but man, if you smother this guy with substandard leadership around him, it can go bad. And like you said, I'd rather have them than the Giants roster. So be very careful, Cleveland Browns.
Okay. I'll just say this about that division as well. Cincinnati Bengals, I think, showed the flip side of that, which is, they decided to keep Marvin Lewis when everyone expected them to make a change last offseason, and here they're sitting 5-3 and in contention for the division.
That's exactly right. They've been very they just
they
knew
used to be the other way
hold it.
around.
Yeah, the
They
Bungles,
used to be.
right?
They absolutely used to be. They used to have, their ownership was impulsive, and they seemed like they made all the wrong decisions. But at least, for the last 15 years, you have to say, well, they're doing it correctly. It hasn't yielded a playoff win, but at least in terms of stability, they have what they were looking for.
Speaking to that, I'm reading the Jeff Pearlman USFL book, Football for a Buck. It's a very good book. And Lindy Infante was the offensive coordinator for the Browns in the 80s. And obviously for the Bengals in the 80s. And obviously at that point, I think Paul Brown was running them, even though the Browns were named after him, right? But he's running them, and he actually was somebody who was an early booster of the USFL and told the gentleman who created the USFL, this is a great idea, go all in. But then the USFL, after year one, got very greedy, and they wanted to make the process go along much quicker to being a major organization. So they expanded, and they started going after NFL players. They started going after players in the draft and overpaying them over what the NFL would. And one of the things they did was to take coaches from the NFL and try to make them head coaches. So Lindy Infante, as the offensive coordinator of the Bengals, was, I think, given the head coaching job at the Blitz. And since they were in staggered seasons, he was going to finish out his season with the Bengals. Paul Brown got really upset with this, and he was like, all right, these guys are going too far. Lindy Infante, you're out of here. Lindy Infante then thought it would be funny to put on a Groucho Marx mustache, basically, and he went out to the Bengals stadium before the game, and he was sitting there trying to get autographs from the players. And Chris Collinsworth and another guy were like laughing with him, and then they apparently all went and had beers at the bar. Like, that is dysfunction. So that's where they were, and the fact that they are now where they are, as you said, it really is a testament to sticking with the plan. And remember, wasn't Marvin Lewis gone last year? Wasn't he stepping away or retiring or going somewhere else? And then it's just like, oh, he's back.
Back.
So it hasn't been the ultimate prize in a championship, but it's been stability, and it's been a lot of playoffs. They're always playing that early Saturday playoff game that no one actually watches.
On the NFL Network.
Yeah, on the NFL Network, like the NBA TV game or whatever in the playoffs. But it is interesting, and I'd recommend that book. That's a good one. All right, that was a lot of NFL. NBA, though, is the new kid on the block of the year during this part of the year right now, and so you tend to jump towards the new and shiny thing, and the NBA has been unbelievably shiny. And I'm going to ask you this question after I say mine, but I always kind of hover around a team in each conference, and they almost become the team that when I open up, I purchased NBA League Pass through my YouTube TV, so now when I open up my YouTube TV, I see all the games right there, and the team I always press play on, that's sort of my guiding principle team, and it doesn't make sense. I don't plan it out. It just kind of happens. The team in the Eastern Conference for me has been the Toronto Raptors, and the team in the Western Conference has been the Los Angeles Lakers when I can do it, although my eyes are getting tired. Staying up for some of these games, I've been really pumped. The last two games were 8 p.m. starts. And then to a lesser degree, shockingly, I've been really into watching the Spurs early on. Who have been your teams?
I would say the Bucks, just because they've surprised me at 7-0, and they also have a Villanova guy on their roster. So I've been following the Villanova players pretty closely. So the Bucks in the East, I would also put the Raptors in the East as well. And then out West, I don't know if I have a single team. I'm a Grizzlies fan, so I do keep my eye on them. I've watched a number of the Pelicans games, and those have been fun and interesting. And I like seeing how some of the pieces they have there with Tatum and Randall, and they've continued a lot of the offensive success that they had toward the end of last season. So I'm happy to see that as well. But I would say those are my teams that I've been watching most closely.
Have you seen much of the Spurs?
I've seen a little bit, not a lot, I have to confess.
I've been really impressed, I think, on both ends of the trade. It's really impressed me, and it's opened up the two teams for me to watch them again. There was almost nothing dynamic about either the Raptors or the Spurs in the last 5 or 6 years. Even when the Spurs were great and they were winning finals, you weren't that excited watching them in the regular season, sitting down and being allured to press play on it. But the Raptors, you're just like, oh my God, Kawhi Leonard is so good. And second, the infrastructure that the Raptors have built is really impressive, to the point where you're sitting there going, how important is Kawhi to this? Like, are they already 90% and he makes them 110%? Like, Masai Ujiri has built a roster that is unbelievably deep, unbelievably skilled, and unbelievably well-placed for the way the game is played right now. And so when you throw Kawhi on it, it just looks tremendous. It's very Spurs-like, and I think I'm now watching him with a new uniform, so it's almost like with new glasses on. And when I see him play, I'm just appreciating all the things I've always known he did. But when you're watching it under a different guise, it just feels a little different. His defense feels more obvious. His offensive skill feels more effective maybe than you saw it in San Antonio. It's almost like he kind of evaporated into the uniform in San Antonio, and you just expected the uniform was carrying a lot of that. And on the flip side, when I watch, and I haven't tried to watch the Spurs, I've just fallen on watching the ends of certain games because they looked close. And what DeMar DeRozan is doing is in complete and utter 180-degree opposition to what I thought would happen. I thought he was going to almost be invisible in that uniform and sort of just be a decent player, but he was being raised up in Toronto. That was my thought. He was being coached up, developed, and he was being put in the right positions. But man, he's like really taking the ball and scoring at the end of the games, putting up 30-point games left and right, and really taking leadership of that team. Both sides of that trade have really won early on.
And he's still not taking too many three-pointers, which I think that was one of the concerns, was that the spacing with Aldridge and DeRozan would not work out so well, that they would occupy like the same 8 feet of the court, as opposed to the modern NBA. But look, I mean, Popovich is on the Mount Rushmore of NBA coaches, so we shouldn't be too surprised that he was able to make it work as well as he did, and as well as he has so far. On the flip side, what do you think of what's going on in Houston? Because let's not forget, the last time that Houston went to a Western Conference Finals, they fired their head coach very early on in the following season because they were not performing up to speed. So are we facing a similar situation? I don't think so, just because D'Antoni's offense, everything that Houston does is predicated on D'Antoni's offense, as opposed to last time when you had Kevin McHale, who was, had done well with them, but it wasn't necessarily as intrinsically tied to their identity and their roster, which I think it is in this instance, but not doing well when you look at the standings right now. I was shocked to see where they are, that they only won one game. I thought they at least won 3, but no, just one.
No, and they're getting blown out too. Now, I know they don't have, James Harden's not back. I didn't see the game last night, but I know he's out. He's not back yet, right? I don't think he was in last night's game. Yeah, they're not in a good position. And I almost feel bad in this case for Carmelo Anthony, because this is not his fault, but it does seem like a black cloud goes with him into the Western Conference. He's not exactly helping things, and he might not have a lot left. It's almost like the Eli Manning thing. They look the same as they did, so it's hard for you to tell where the skill has diminished. They look the same. They haven't been insanely injured. Eli can hit. He can hit a nice slant. He can throw a nice deep ball still, so you're like, oh, maybe he still got it. Same thing with Carmelo. He has a nice turnaround, a nice post-up, nice three-pointer, and you go, oh, maybe it is there. So it kind of hides what is the obvious diminishment of the player. But I think it's the worst-case scenario of James Harden going out this early, them looking like they're having a hangover from the season before. It's veteran players who always take some time to get into the season. They had their amazing season from opening gun to closing gun last year, and in their mind they can be convinced it was because Chris Paul got injured that they didn't go to the finals and win an NBA championship. They would have won the championship. I think LeBron would have gotten maybe 2 games against the Rockets, but they would have won the championship. And so now there's sort of a hangover. It's a purgatory. They're veteran players. Who is the youngster pushing them to play early on? So I think it will even out. It's almost like how the Warriors won 58 last year, and it felt like a complete failure, in the regular season. They're going to win, I think, 55-56 this year as opposed to 66 or 65, whichever one they won. And they got to get Harden back, and I think they're going to end up trading for some of their old faithfuls as well. I wouldn't be surprised if they somehow got Ariza back.
Yeah.
What is Mbamute is on. I kind of joked in our podcast that the Clippers and I felt the Trailblazers were kind of minor league holding spots for future Rockets players this season. So I think they're going to get back on it. They're going to de-emphasize Anthony, which they have to emphasize now with Harden out. Chris Paul's going to be fine, but they're veteran. I mean, it's difficult. It's very hard early on, especially when the season basically starts in the summer now. That has been stark, that we're talking about things with kind of such intensity, and it's only Halloween today. Like, the NBA season used to start today. I keep seeing all these flashbacks to LeBron James' first game, flashbacks to Kevin Durant's first game, and you're like, oh yeah, the season used to start now. And I'm going to be honest with you, I think it should still start now. This early thing is nice when it's there, but it does feel a little bit early. So I think the Rockets are going to be fine, and they're going to bring in reinforcements. I don't know that they have to get Jimmy Butler, but
no, certainly not for 4 first-round draft picks.
No,
absolutely not.
But actually, that brings up a good point. How do you feel about the early start at this point? It was year 2 of the early start, and so my 2 kind of thesis points that I've noticed this year internally with me: it's too early. It just is. It was just too early. It's cool on opening night when you're watching NBA basketball in middle of October. But like I said, when we're at October 31st and it feels like certain teams' years are over, it's like, I don't think so. And 2, I'm starting to feel like the NBA has reached a bubble point right now, much like technology coverage reached its bubble point about 5 years ago. Remember, everybody was about tech coverage. Everyone's getting venture capital money, The Verge and Mashable and like the New York Times and Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal and Recode and Decode and all this stuff. Everything was about, oh, the new Apple's coming out. Here's what it's going to be. Here's what the rumors are. This was like, this thing was absconded out of the Foxconn factory, and here's the prototypes of what it looks like. That's all everyone cared about. And then the day the thing came out, it was the greatest thing ever. There still is some of that. We still care about events, like we cared about the Apple event yesterday and the new iPhone event last month, but it's not as intense. And I don't think that's the problem of tech. I think it was the problem of almost a mining bubble type thing. Let's go on this place because we found gold, we found oil deposits, we found this, and let's try to mine the heck out of it. And tech had that, and it was the coverage, and it's died off. It's still there, but it's not like it was. Does the NBA feel to you like it's reached that point? Isn't there too much coverage of the NBA?
Well, I don't feel exactly the same way. Because I feel like, well, I'll say this. I think there's too much analytics. I think they've gone too far in terms of the analytics with the NBA, where you can see pieces where they do isolate play after play after play in a single article from the game before. And, they put that in the context of just whatever the statistic might be. It's interesting by some fraction, but it's not as interesting as I think the market would suggest it is, meaning that there's many more pieces like that than I think there is an audience for it, but I could be wrong. So I don't mind the intensity of the coverage or the amount of the coverage, but some of it I think has gone a little too far. And I think you're starting to see some of the pushback on that. I read an article, maybe it was last week or the week before, about, have we gone too far with analytics in basketball? And to some extent, maybe we have. So that's my response. Now, in terms of the early season, it doesn't bother me so much. However, I'm also a proponent of going very far in the other direction with the NBA, which would be start the season on Christmas Day and then finish the finals in July. And have that be the NBA season, because it keeps inching in that direction anyway. People do pay attention, the casual fan, and we're not casual fans, but casual fans pay attention at the start of the season, and then they sort of drift off in November, December, and then they'll watch the Christmas game, but really don't start watching again until after the NFL playoffs are over. So if it won't happen, but I would say go the other direction and say start the NBA season on Christmas Day. That's their day. They've gained ownership of Christmas Day, and extend into July for the playoffs.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a good point with the analytics as well. Colin Cowherd always says analytics are great, but he likes manalytics. Like mano a mano on the court, you know who's great, and the best player is really going to win it. That is the case with the NBA. Baseball, football has much more to the nuance of the amount of people that are on the field of play, and the amount of time between things to discuss. There's plays and there's space there's baseball on the baseball field. There's space that has to be accounted for, whether a guy can get a ball or not get a ball, on base percent, all this stuff. But basketball is sort of put the balls out and play. And yes, there's timeouts, after play timeouts, all that kind of stuff. But mostly it's just playing. There's not a lot of dead space time to rethink what someone could have done. It's really, this person's taking the ball and they're going to make it or they're not going to make it. So you brought up a good point. I think Zach Lowe does a lot of that stuff with the putting the little screen and the GIFs of the plays in the story, and you're just like, man, this is breaking things up. Like if I'm going to read about sports, and I've actually come to the point where I like to use my eyes and my ears for sports, and I like to watch, right? I like video and audio for sports, and I like the written word for current events, politics, media, or media criticism, things like that. And then on the opposite, I think you should not use your eyes or ears to video or audio for news or current events, because they're trying to sell an angle and a bias more than really that can be done if you're reading the right thing. They have to sell in a different way. So I think that's difficult. So I've almost all of my video and audio are towards sports now, and my kind of reading of the written word is for news and events, books, things like that. But if I'm going to read a story about sports, I want it to be as good as something I would read about news or profiles or events. Like, I want to know about the person's life. I want to know about the interactions with the head coach or people they had in their past, or little connections that come along the way. That stuff is more interesting. The human element in the written word is more interesting, I think, than how a certain play was run, and they're doing more side action and more pin downs. And it's like, I don't care, man. I'm watching the game for the beauty of the whole. And I've actually come to the point where I think that the people who do this kind of analytical writing, that it's more of a kind of a source tactic, that it makes their sources appreciate their knowledge, so the source might tell them more about the team. Because, those are the people they're writing for, right? They're writing for the assistant coaches. They're writing for the head coaches. They're writing for basketball operations. They're writing for the people. The only 35 people in the world, as well as high school coaches and all that, who care about this. There's just not a market to care to that level about this. But who cares about it are the people whose genius is being appreciated by caring about it. So that's where I tend to think it's like that. And with Zach Lowe, I tend to like him more on his podcast because he can't do that stuff. So he's more using it to kind of be background material in his head, but he's just speaking, right? He's just talking to people about things, and those little things become 10% of the content as opposed to 80% of it. So that's where I kind of feel like that. The final thing, I was really watching. I'm very interested with this Jimmy Butler Minnesota thing, because it looks like he's not leaving. And I find it to be fascinating how much bad stuff he sort of had to say about his teammates, and that he still shows up because he has to. He's got to get paid and he wants to play, but he still shows up. And I was watching that game. I don't know if you saw it the other night. It was on NBA TV when the Lakers went there, 8 p.m. start. Mm-hmm. And down the stretch, you're like, it's another one of those things where Jimmy Butler's always sort of been around 500 teams, so you never think he's as good as he is. Like, he's not a number one, but if he's a 2 or 3, you're probably a 55, 56 win team. But man, he was so good defensively, hitting big threes, just fully being an alpha on the court against LeBron. And I think that look, Tom Thibodeau was not going to move off of him. I mean, I could be wrong, but his career, his coaching career is done if he moves off of Jimmy Butler. It's sort of like the Giants, right? Having the 66-year-old GM, the 50-whatever-year-old head coach, and the 30-something, late 30s quarterback. Like, he is at the phase where he can't rebuild. Like, this is what they're doing. So him keeping him and daring him to play. And then I'm even interested in, like, when he passes to Karl Anthony Towns and then they're high-fiving and chest bumping and you're like, what is going on right now? This is unbelievably fascinating watching this. But I think Jimmy Butler is probably in his best place because I don't think he turns another team. I don't think he's the type of character that goes with LeBron and is subservient enough to be useful to him. So I think sitting in this position is going to be the most interesting thing for him.
Yeah, if I were another team, I would go near Jimmy Butler. Not because of his production on the court, although I think that could fall off. I think he relies on his athleticism even more than, say, Paul George does. But we've seen two different stops right now where he's become such a distraction. So to return to your point about analytics versus the human story being told, the human story around Jimmy Butler is not one that I necessarily would want to bring into my locker room if I were a franchise.
There's a little Odell Beckham there.
Possibly, yeah. Well, you've heard me say this, and it's not really all that applicable, but if you're a backup quarterback in the NFL, you have to be a nice guy. Because they're not going to keep you around if you're a distraction. And I think with Butler, I know there was talk like, oh, he wants to be in Brooklyn. I mean, stay as far away from him as you can in Brooklyn, given his age and the decisions that they made not too long ago, which they would be replicating some of those. And I don't know where he fits. I could see him fitting in Houston, but not for 4 first-round draft picks. How they got to 4, I don't know. But they need to talk to Billy King because when you read the history of that trade, it wasn't that Boston wouldn't accept, say, 1 draft pick or 2 draft picks for what they were asking. It's just that Billy King kept coming back to them and raising the stakes without them even really insisting upon it. So
when it was the swaps too, it was the pick swaps that really became an issue. Now, you bring up a great point with that, but I wonder if this one's a little different in the sense that Jimmy's 29 instead of 35 and 37 or whatever. It makes that trade just look so bad that he's that old. And 2, that Daryl Morey. I mean, we read it in the. Didn't you read the Michael Lewis book where Daryl Morey was like the whole first couple of chapters, I think, and he was talking about how hard it is to draft people. And so I think Daryl Morey is I know talent in the NBA and what wins in the NBA from the NBA player as much as anybody. And he has a way of corralling in elite players in their prime. Now, do they always work out? No. But he got Dwight Howard when he was still in his prime. He got him to sign there away from LA for 3 years. Some would say it kind of worked out because they got to a conference championship. But he got James Harden there through the trade. He got Chris Paul there. He gets elite players to come there when they're still in their prime or before or thereabouts their prime. So I think he sees Jimmy Butler as just another elite piece to get who's still in his prime at 29. And I think he sees 4 draft picks as not a huge deal and one which he could probably get back through other trades if things don't work out. Like, I think the problem for the Nets is obviously that the tactic changed 1 year in. And so the bottom fell out on the whole thing, and the worst case scenario happened because they didn't kind of have they kind of didn't have the heart to stay in it at the big boy poker table. Michael Prokhorov did not want to do this anymore. He decided, let's do it this year, and he went, oop, I don't like this, and be damned with whatever happens now to the long-term cost. So I think it could probably work out there. But I agree with you. I probably wouldn't want Jimmy Butler because I just think he's very all over the map. It's dangerous how quick his mood can change about things. And it's like he's very unstable off the court. I love that on the court, but it carries over too much off the court. And I think that can become a danger. Now that makes me think the last point, most important point of the NBA season. Have you now come around to my thought on LeBron and the Lakers? Do you even remember what my thought was? That I didn't like the move. I thought he was doing it for personal, which he's allowed to do, for professional, off-the-court reasons, allowed to do it, but I didn't like that he was giving up championship aspirations this quickly, whereas he could have gone to literally, and I'm not joking, I think he could have gone to any team in the Eastern Conference and had them knocking on the door of a finals.
No, I still don't agree with it because I thought your point was back then that he should have stayed in Cleveland, that you wanted that, you wanted that story to continue.
Well, yeah, there was that. Yeah, thank you. You're a good editor.
So if we're looking strictly at he should have stayed in Cleveland or go to the Lakers, I still maintain that the Lakers have the more interesting roster and the more interesting future. That the pieces that are in place right now with Josh Hart, Ingram, Lonzo Ball, that there's more to be done with the Lakers than there is with Cleveland, and we've seen what's happened in Cleveland recently.
Oh boy,
it's a further testament to LeBron's greatness that he was able to get that team to the NBA Finals. Now, if you're saying LeBron should have gone to Toronto or should have gone to the Sixers or should have gone, take your Eastern Conference pick, it might change a little bit, but it depends on what he's looking for. Is he looking for to go back to the finals one more year or 2 more years, or is he looking to, plant a flag and build something for the next, say, 5 years, and which one gives him the best chance to get there? I don't know. I mean, I still think the Lakers, they're going through a rough patch right now, but I still think they have more attractive pieces in place than a number of the other destinations he could have selected.
But at nearly 34, I'm just so afraid of that. I am just so nervous that to give up his age 34 year with the hope that his age 35 and age 36 year will be the one where things pay off, that scares me. And I've been trying to think of sort of parallels. And the one that got me really thinking, and you could see kind of the A/B testing of how it can work out, I was thinking almost LeBron as the 2000-2001 Arizona Diamondbacks pitchers. So you had these just unbelievable Hall of Fame pitchers, righty and lefty, later in age as baseball players and pitchers, and Curt Schilling and Randy Johnson. They had both pretty much won the World Series against the Yankees by themselves, pitching in every game and relief and starting and just doing whatever needed to be done at advanced ages. And they both were 20-game winners, basically. They were at the height of the profession. And they were in a little bit of an easier, the little bit of the easier conference or part of the league, right? The NL has always sort of been the easier place to be a pitcher because you have the pitcher hitting ninth, and just in general, it doesn't seem to be as stacked as the American League does, who have the extra hitter. And you look at the American League East in particular at that time, it was a murderer's row. And, there might have been performance-enhancing drugs on top of it, which made things a lot harder. So Curt Schilling goes to the Red Sox. He went to a team which was really stacked and had the right team around him, and he was able to deliver the World Series to them in his first year there after they had heartbreak the year before. You look at Randy Johnson, and you would have thought, here's the guy who's going to go to the American League, and he's really going to take it by storm. He went to the Yankees. Do you even remember one of his starts with the Yankees in the 2 years he was there?
No.
And it was 2 years, by the way, where he had a pretty representative record, although he had a 5 ERA. And so I think what happens is sometimes moving yourself to a new place exposes actually where you are, whereas the old league you were in, the old conference you were in, protected you a little bit more, allowed you to age a little more gracefully while still keeping your superstardom. And then when you go to the other place, you're going for the right reasons. You think you still have the step you had, and things can just go in funny directions. Now, if LeBron were going to the version of the Lakers that was almost like the Red Sox at that time, where it was just a scrappy group, perfect compliments to him, that would be different. But I'm almost feeling like LeBron is going to that Yankee team, and he's great. I mean, he's been as great as advertised and as expected with the Lakers early on. But we forgot how much he was pacing himself in the Eastern Conference. They started out pretty badly last year with the Cavaliers. They found their way to 50 wins. But a lot of that just got kind of kicked to the back seat in the narrative of him going here. The team he went to, he needs to be like Miami LeBron to get to the finals. They're not going to, they might, I mean, it's very early. We said it's Halloween. Look, it's when the season used to start, but they're not in the playoffs right now. They're 2-5. And you look at the schedule and you start saying, okay, where are the easy wins? There's a couple, but there are not easy wins. It is going to be an unbelievable struggle. I thought they would be mid 40s to late 40s wins. It's possible that they're going to struggle to get to 500. So, on Halloween, and this is not April Fool's, I think this team needs to be unbelievably aggressive for this year. They have to. They have to try to corral this thing. My biggest worry, too, is the Magic Johnsons, the Rob Pelinkas of the world on this team do not have the killer instinct to go for it right now. I think they're taking LeBron going to the Lakers as validation that he can win with this team. And I think that they're taking him coming to the Lakers as the win. No, winning has to be the win. You have to win when you have LeBron. Like, is he still going to be the media mogul when he's manning a 41-win team? Like, part of his vibe is based on dominance and not winning the finals, but getting there 8 straight times. And I just wonder if a lot of this kind of, stuff starts getting like a lot of the invincibility factor of him starts getting whittled down a little bit by being here. So I said Damian Lillard. I got a crazy thought. Okay, I was thinking about this last night when I was watching Detroit play Boston and watching early Detroit. What if the move is to save Blake Griffin and make him the happiest, most grateful person in the world? Bring him back to the Lakers and bring him back to LA and put him on the Lakers.
How would you make that trade?
Well, here's the thing. You got to wait till the 15th. And this is the other reason you're not hearing anything from the Lakers, because any moves they can make have to be based around all these contracts they signed from players who don't come eligible to be traded until the 15th. So I think, 2 teams probably have to be involved, but I want Damian Lillard, and I am crazy. I understand it, but sometimes you get into these thoughts and you're watching certain things and something hits you. I think it's the time, and I think it's the good bet to try to bring Blake Griffin in. Have you been watching him much? I mean, look,
he's played very well.
He's been healthy.
Point Blake.
Point Blake. He's hitting threes a bit now. I think he is like, if he's going to be healthy, I know it's a big if, but man, how healthy do you get if all of a sudden you're given like the chance to come back to LA that quick? And I can guarantee you Detroit's going to be okay with that. Even if they have to take back KCP. But I think you need to make a move. And look, the other thing is, I think sometimes when you look at who you could trade for, right? You look at players that fill a need. They need 3-and-Ds all around him. They don't have many. You look at like Chris Middleton would be the best, but then you're thinking he's on a 7-0 team. And second off, are we sure Chris Middleton doesn't fall off coming to play with LeBron? You need people who you don't have a doubt about. And I think Blake Griffin, we saw him play in the Western Conference and be a high-level player. Now he's gone to the East. And I think there's an almost intangible boost that would hit him, especially this year. If you're like Blake, you're coming back. And you could stick it to the Clippers a little bit too. And I think he would play really well with LeBron. I really do, because I think if he's going to start hitting threes now, he's going to be back in Staples. It's crazy, I understand that. But if you could get him, and if you could get Damian Lillard, I think you have a team that can compete a little bit.
Well, it's hard to argue with that. I think they would be more competitive than they are now. That salary that Blake Griffin has, though, I don't think you can bring that onto that roster. I think that just alters everything that they are hoping to do. To your point, though, there is a lot of chatter about how players would not sign with LeBron or would not want to go there. I mean, you heard Paul George make those comments last week. And, you've heard rumors that Jimmy Butler didn't want to go there for that reason as well. And Kawhi Leonard doesn't want to go there for that reason as well. So then it raises the question, well, whom will they get? But, I don't know. I'm going to think about that one. I promise I'll think about Blake Griffin on the Lakers. I can see your point, but I look at their roster and the younger players and the flexibility they have, and to me, that's still more valuable than, say, bringing in Blake Griffin today.
Yeah.
I'll think about it.
I understand. It's a weird one. And if I said this to myself 6 months ago, I would have laughed myself off this podcast. But watching him, he's got a fire about him right now. Look, he's locked in. And if he's locked in with the Pistons right now, and I think Dwayne Casey, by the way, is a good coach. If he's locked in with the Pistons right now, it is the get-rich-quick scheme for the Lakers because everybody's going to want to play. Everybody's going to be willing to deal. Everybody's going to be looking to do things. And I'll tell you what, maybe Detroit can sort of start over and get, like if you did a three-way with Lakers, Portland, Detroit, you could probably find your way off of Andre Drummond too. Now you might be having to take on an Evan Turner here or Myers Leonard or whatever. There's guys you're going to have to take on, I think. But there's also young players. The Lakers have some young players who, I'm not liking what I'm hearing. I know it's early, but Brandon Ingram, I'm not sitting on no bench. Like, I'm here to start. Hold on, settle down there, brother. Like, please. And he doesn't hit threes. He's a nice player. He really is. But do we have time? Do the timelines match here? And I'm telling you, you got Lonzo, who I love, but you got Lonzo, you got Brandon Ingram. Those are two guys who would be nice consolation prizes for a couple of those teams if you could get back these players and then move salaries around to make things match. Yes, it's going to be hard. It's a huge number, but I've weirdly got onto the narrative for this team in particular. Imagine the Lakers getting just a really motivated Blake playing with LeBron, who would probably be somewhat appreciative to have an adult in the room again. Getting back to LA, he cried. He was so angry when he had to leave LA for good reason. And maybe Blake gets that jersey in the rafters at Staples Center after all. So it's crazy, but I don't know. There's not a lot of options. That's the thing. That's where I landed on this one. It's weird, but there's not a lot of options out there that you can just do and be somewhat content with. And so that's that. Tim, this quick podcast turned into a long one.
It did, as it always does.
Yeah. So that was some good talking.
It was great. I'm sure thank you.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll have to do it pretty soon again to once Blake goes to the Lakers, the Blakers, right? We should be in pretty good. The Blake Show. I mean, look, it works. The Los Angeles Blakers. So.
All right.
Thanks, Tim.